Hopefully, you've successfully logged into the Desmos activity and read the first couple of screens that give you a few bits of information about details. This first screen, for example, gives you some tips, things to just kind of keep in mind. The second screen gives you some instructions, so just reminding you to have page 2 in the packet and telling you to focus on numbers 1 through 10, the first row in the packet. And now the actual card sort begins. This is the first 10 cards. There are 10 pairs of cards. There are actually 20 pairs of cards total, but it's a little too crazy to try to do 20 pairs all on one screen. It just gets like a giant jumble. So that's why you'll notice this next button. The next series of cards is going to take you through the last half, numbers 11 through 20. In any case, let's do the first half, cards 1 through 10, and let's use a bit of investigative thinking. I'm purposely leaving this as kind of an open task for now because I want to challenge you to try to do what you can on your own without me simply telling you what to do. In fact, if you feel ambitious enough to do it, I would suggest you pause or even stop this video completely and just try to click around these cards to see what you're working with. If you can't see a card very clearly or if the font is too small, try clicking on it. If you click on it, it should enlarge it enough that you can make out the numbers or the details and you can see what's going on. The goal is to make a match, and a match can be found by simply taking and dragging one card on top of another card. The colors do matter. You'll always want to match a green to a blue. In what order you match them really doesn't matter at all. So you might want to start with stuff that's in your comfort zone. For example, you might have naturally gravitated towards something that looks familiar, maybe like a table of values, and said something to yourself like, "Ooh, tables. Oh, I've done that in Algebra 1. I know how to do tables." Maybe you're looking at this table thinking, okay, N and T event, those are like variables. So I'm going to look for an equation that has those variables. Now, that's not really going to help. All the blue cards have an N and a T event, so it looks like I need to be more specific. Let me see if I can go back and look again. I have an 0 with a 0, a 1 and a 3, a 2 and a 6, a 3 and a 9, a 4 and a 12. Okay, let me look for some specific cards that might help. Like I see this card with a 64 in it. That doesn't seem to make much sense. That one's probably not going to work. I see a few other cards that have numbers that don't seem familiar, like this 10, that doesn't look familiar. The 4 doesn't look familiar. 2/3, where the heck did you come from? So by the time you kind of narrow down a few specific cards to look at, I'm definitely gravitating towards cards that have 3s in them because I can see a 3 here. And I can also tell the pattern itself in this bottom row is increasing by 3. 0 plus 3 is 3, plus 3 is 6, plus 3 is 9, plus 3 is 12. That's kind of compelling to me because I know that adding 3 seems to kind of make a difference. So I'm going to focus only for a moment on cards with a 3. And by process of elimination, I'm going to see if I can figure this out. Now let's look. If I think about this N and T of N thing, I should be able to plug in a number from N, and the answer should be whatever's in this bottom column, or bottom row, the T of N. So if I plug in a 0, I should get a 0. Plug in a 1, I should get a 3. Plug in a 2, I should get a 6, and so on. If you looked at some of the same cards I did, hopefully this card, 3N, came to mind. Because if I started to look at those two cards together, I'm starting to see something here. If I plug in N as 0, I get 3 times 0, which is 0. Boom, there it is. If I plug in N as 1, 3 times 1 is 3. Boom, there it is. Plug in N as 2, 3 times 2 is 6. Plug in N as 3, 3 times 3 is 9. Plug in N as 4, 4 times 3 is 12. That looks perfect. It looks like I've made a match. Now, to connect these cards, simply take one of them and drag it on top of the other one till you see that little gray highlighted space. And then the cards should kind of naturally snap together. And you'll see that at the top it says 2 cards. Now, to save space, once you know that these cards are matched up, you can click this little arrow to the left. It collapses the cards, and you can move them off to the side so that you have a little bit more organization going on. In any case, All of the matching that you're going to do is kind of like that. You're going to use whatever context clues and whatever common sense you can think of to try to make your matches. For some of the things that have like a graph, for example, treat them kind of like you treated the table. If you're a table person by nature and you feel like tables make sense, you can even bust out a piece of scratch paper and quickly make a table of values with these points. You could make a table that has a 0 and a 64, 1 and a 16, 2 and a 4, 3 and 1, 4 and 0.25, and you could do the exact same thing that I just talked through in that example. Other problems might not require too much of a table or too much work. Other problems might be common sense. Like, for example, this one has words. Start with 10 pennies in a jar. Each day, add 3 more pennies to the jar. Naturally, I'm only looking at 2 numbers here. I see a 10 and I see a 3. So my instinct is look for an equation that has a 10 and a 3 in it. Oh, looks like we found one. 10 and a 3. Looks like we can make that match. So again, the more you can do to kind of simplify your life, the better. Because even if there's one that's a little tricky, even if there's one that you're looking at where you're like, oh my gosh, what in the world is the pattern here? I don't even think I've seen this before. Then maybe you can use the process of elimination. Maybe you can successfully match up some of the other cards so that if you're left with something, it might be a little bit more obvious why it matches up. Now, once you finish this screen, take the time to check. Unfortunately, Desmos doesn't tell you if your matches are right or wrong. Notice it let me match them up, but it didn't like turn green if I was right or red if it was wrong. It just lets me match them up. And then if I move to the next screen, nothing happens. So if you finish all of these matching cards, open a tab or a completely separate device and check the answer key, the one that's linked in our learning plan. Make sure that you did successfully match the letters and the numbers on each card together. If you have all of your matches successful, then click Next and do the second row on page 2, cards 11 through 20. The idea on the second page is almost exactly the same, but hopefully by then you'll have some experience and maybe by then you'll go a little bit faster and be a bit more efficient. I'm purposely not giving you a ton of directions here because I want you to really use your best common sense, your observational skills, and the best you can to just kind of instinctively tap into the part of your brain that knows how to find patterns. Once you finish, then the next video will help walk you through the rest of the page 2 in the actual packet. If you have questions, you have a couple of options. One sort of natural option is to use the answer key and to see if working backwards from the answers helps you make sense of things. Another possible option is if you have somebody's contact information, see if they're willing to hop online with you and to do this card sort with you. If you have access to some sort of chat tool like a Zoom chat or a Google Meet, something like that, or even if you just FaceTime each other and screen share, you might be able to kind of work together and have that person kind of explain how they're thinking or what they're thinking when they're making their matches. Sometimes hearing somebody else's thoughts can be helpful. The last option that you can consider is attending the digital office hours that I mentioned in my Google Classroom post. If you don't know what I'm talking about, check out the Classroom stream in our Google Classroom, and you'll notice a meeting code and a password to enter a digital meeting between the hours of noon and 2 o'clock. If you're totally stuck and even this video isn't helping, I'll be glad to walk you through and we can quickly just kind of FaceTime each other on Zoom. So I said FaceTime. We can Zoom each other, which is a weird verb. And you can ask me to explain something or you can tell me what you're confused about, and I'll be happy to try to explain it in words. Another option, if needed, is to also email me. But I know that that can be kind of hard too. So pick an option if you get stuck and try to follow up. See if you can find some help that naturally suits the nature of the question that you have. Between now and the time that you watch the next video, try to finish all of the screens in this Desmos and get all the way to the end. If you're wrong, you won't know from the Desmos. You'll have to check your own answers. So between the time this video ends and the time you start the next one, try to finish the Desmos and check your work.